So the question is, can everyone hear me and see my screen? I see a thumbs up. Thanks, Abby. So good morning, everybody. I'm Russell Callender. I'm the director of Washington Sea Grant. I really appreciate your time and interest this morning. And I've looked through the list of people that have signed up, and I recognize some names, but not a lot. And so I'm going to take that to mean that many of you may not actually know that much about Sea Grant. So what I'd like to do is walk through a reasonably short presentation that'll give you an introduction to Washington Sea Grant and let you know about some of the unique features of how we operate. And fundamentally, this is a conversation about our research program and our RFP, but we are a fairly diverse program, and I hope you'll see that from the intro. So let me walk you through, again, I've got roughly 18 slides, and I'm going to go kind of quickly through the introduction and then slow down a little bit as we talk about the RFP. So Sea Grant's been around a long time. We're celebrating our 50th year this year. We're a NOAA university partnership, and we're part of the College of the Environment. And even though we are the Washington Sea Grant program, we're part of a larger national network. In every coastal and Great Lakes state, there is a Sea Grant program. And so we are the program for the state of Washington, even though we're based at UW. We're not that big of a program. We get a federal allocation of about $2.7 million, and we have to match that on a 2-to-1 basis with non-federal monies. And that'll be relevant as we talk about the RFP a little bit later. I've got a staff of about 35 people focused on research, education, advisory services, and communications, and I'll touch on each one of those briefly. For the part that's really of your interest, we've got about $1 million a year that's part of our competitive research pot. Whoops, hang on. So sorry about that. So this is a slide that really, I think, summarizes pretty well in one quick slide what Sea Grant does. On the left, it highlights that we support scientific research, outreach, and education. That's kind of the core of what we do. And so our RFP is the core of our research effort, and that's just one piece. Follow the arrow to the right. We're all about partnerships. So we engage with the university community, state and federal agencies, tribes, industry, and the broader public. And fundamentally, what we try to do is to produce science-based information and tools that can be used and are useful. So we're really in the business of trying to support highly applied and hopefully useful information. So I mentioned our federal allocation is $2.7 million. Our overall budget's almost $8 million. We, like many of you, we go out and we compete for money in other venues and sources. Some of these are research projects that we would go after. Some of these might be projects that support our education and outreach efforts. But you can see that research is roughly 33% of what we do. This is a slide that's probably less useful to you. It's really useful when I go brief our congressional delegation. We try to make an impact with that federal investment, and this is a slide that I use when I'm trying to show the value of our return on investment. So one thing we have to do within Sea Grant, and you'll see that if you become an investigator with us, is we have to report back what we actually do, and there's a lot of metrics that we respond to. And we estimate, this is over a 4-year period, about $60 million in services and economic benefits to the state. We reach about 500,000 people across the state. We do have a couple large volunteer programs focused on European green crab and on harmful algal blooms, and that's conservatively estimated at about $2.6 million in value. I mentioned partnerships a couple slides ago. We have a large number of partners, about 700, not just in Washington, but nationally. So I'm going to touch very briefly on the the three main components of what we do. So outreach is key to what we do within Sea Grant. We've got a number of staff that are located across the state, from Shelton to Aberdeen to Port Angeles, Port Townsend, Bellingham, Kitsap County. So, and our staff really they're all scientifically trained, and their job really is to take the science that you might produce at the University of Washington or another place, or we might support through our competitive research program, or just news of the field, if you will, and help support small businesses, communities, county planners, in a variety of topics. And I've listed some of those topics that we cover here. I'm not going to read those. You can all read them yourselves. We have a communications shop. I call it Small But Mighty. They produce a lot of highly visible, compelling, well-written materials. And so if you end up being a Sea Grant PI, this is one venue for you to be able to take your work that you do and to reach a broader audience and to communicate the results and the impact of your science. If you're not a subscriber and get our C-Star, keep doing that. If you're not a subscriber to C-Star, I'd urge you to reach out to myself, and I can connect you and get you connected into those stories. We have an education component as well. We're primarily focused on two major areas, and they're listed in the top left. The Orca Bowl, which is it's a competition based on the National Ocean Sciences Bowl. This is the regional venue here in this area that we manage, and it's a competitive game show format, but it's really interesting and exciting to see the high school kids come in, and they're scary smart. I bet many of you can't answer a lot of the questions that these kids do. It kind of blows me away every time I see them. We also support with NOAA, the NOAA Science Camp, and this is an opportunity to reach middle schoolers and let them actually meet quote unquote actual scientists. And it's sort of fun to see the kids light up when they realize that scientists aren't nerds wearing white lab coats, but they're out there with long hair, ponytails, and shorts, you know. So it's a pretty fun venue, and I'd urge you, if you have interest, to reach out to us. There's volunteer opportunities to help support this. Fellowships is a key component of what we do. Deborah is online here. She's our fellowship coordinator. She manages seven different fellowships. I'm not going to list all of them, but there's a Coastal Marine Policy Fellowship that's based here in the state, which is a Mark Hirschman Marine Policy Fellowship. There's a National Marine Policy Fellowship called the Knaus Fellowship. I'm not going to list the other ones, but there's one in particular that's super relevant to our conversation today. It's a research fellowship, and there's benefits for doing that I'll talk about when I get into the RFP conversation. So let me sort of dive into our competitive research efforts. So to give you a sense of how competitive this process is, these are the numbers from our last RFP. Our RFPs come out every other year. In 2019, we had 37 pre-proposals asking for about $8.5 million. From that, we winnowed that down, not a little bit more than half, or a little bit less than half. So 21 full proposals asking for almost $5 million. And the end result was 8 funded proposals. That's likely to be roughly the number. We're going to get 8 to maybe 10 potentially funded proposals from this competition. Because projects, as all of you know, that have funded research, you know, there's a large continuum in time as you did multiple projects. So we're managing about 25 projects involving 28 institutions and more than 100 investigators at any one time. We also have opportunities to support aquaculture related work, but those competitions generally are managed by the National Sea Grant office, and we don't have a lot of input. We have virtually no input about when those competitions come out. But as soon as they do, we try to let everybody know here in the state. So there's some key documents that I would urge you to become familiar with. Hopefully you have seen our request for proposals. I suspect you probably have since you're here. That came out on Friday. It's also found on the Washington Sea Grant webpage. If you just Google Washington Sea Grant, it'll pop up, and it's on the top right side of that page. There's a couple other documents that are very relevant as you start thinking about research proposals to Sea Grant. One is our 2018 to 24 strategic plan, and I'll summarize that very briefly in a second. And we're also emphasizing diversity, equity, and inclusion in our RFP this year. And so we do have a 10-year roadmap for Sea Grant that I'd urge you to look at as well. And there's links to these documents in the RFP itself. So from our strategic plan, we've got 4 major priorities listed here: healthy coastal ecosystems, sustainable fisheries and aquaculture, resilient communities, economies, and ocean literacy and workforce development. Our strategic plan is incredibly broad. I mean, you can take a look at aligning yourselves with our strategic plan, and it's kind of not that hard to do if you're working in the marine and coastal space. But we do urge you to make those concrete linkages to our plan. I will make one point on the ocean literacy and workforce development. In the past, we had supported ocean literacy related work that is more programmatic or operational in nature. We're discouraging that kind of work in this RFP. We're really looking for, if you have a research project that is about ocean literacy or workforce development, those are fair game. If you're looking for other opportunities to support workforce development or ocean literacy that aren't research related, reach out to me, and there's another small pot of money that I have for seed money for small projects. So this request for proposal, it's about $2 million a year over 2 years, and again, it's to support 8 to 10 projects. Just to realign or to reemphasize, it needs to align with our strategic plan. It needs to meet evaluation criteria, and I'll touch on those in a second. One of the fundamental pieces is the inclusion of an engagement plan. Because we are a very applied program, we really want to ensure that the research results, while important and critical for the scientific discourse and literature, are really focused on trying to get information out fairly soon after your research project, or even in the middle of the project, to potential users and consumers of that information that might even include the general public, small businesses, tribes, etc. All of the proposal-related documentation, the pre-proposals, the full proposals, have to be submitted through Sea Grant. Kate Lytle, who's on the call here, is the wizardress of Sea Grant and can help you navigate that. So don't be scared about the Sea Grant piece. Broad eligibility, PIs can be associated with a university, 2 or 4 year college, museum, research lab, nonprofit, or tribal institution. And there's a full list of eligibility in the RFP. In terms of project size, we're not NSF, we're not ONR, we're a fairly small program, and our projects are not huge. We have limitations of requesting up to $140,000 a year for up to 2 years. There is a matching fund requirement. This is something that's in Sea Grant legislation. We can't control that. So for any dollar that we would provide to you, which is federal-based funding, you would have to come up with of half of that from non-federal dollars, and we can help you navigate that as well. I mentioned in the fellowship slide, the research fellow. This is really an important piece, and something that I think is one of the benefits of Sea Grant is that, well, first of all, let me back up before I even go to the benefits from the Sea Grant piece. We have an emphasis on education and outreach, and so it's really important to us to be able to support graduate student participation in research projects. And we know the cost of those, that participation has gone up. And we've been able to find a bit of a loophole in what Sea Grant legislatively directs us to do. By calling this a fellow, we can reduce the indirect cost on the fellowship portion of the budget. So it would be cheaper than you would get a graduate student in many other research competitions. And that cost for the fellow must be included in the $140K per year. And I probably confused everybody, and Kate can maybe help answer those questions at the end of this. I mentioned our diversity, equity, and inclusion roadmap. We are including DEI evaluation criteria in the RFP. You can see that it's 10% of the evaluation, both for the pre-proposal and the full proposal. And this is really to try to broaden that participation of underserved and underrepresented communities and individuals in the research. It's also to try to find ways to benefit through our research underserved and underrepresented communities kind of writ large. This has been fairly important for Sea Grant, and this is certainly an area that we want to continue to emphasize. So evaluation criteria, if you look, there's a table in the RFP that lists evaluation criteria for pre-proposals and full proposals, and there's a little bit difference in terms of their emphasis, and I'll talk about that in a second. So the first one is project contribution, and this is, is the project consistent with our priorities? Is it relevant to the needs of the state? Does it build capacity? And if you look at the pre-proposal criteria, we emphasize this relevance piece more so than we do in the full proposal. So that's literally one of the gates you have to get through in the pre-proposal. Technical scientific merit, clearly we want to support high quality, technically sound science that's innovative, has solid methods, et cetera. That's de-emphasized a little bit in the pre-proposal, but it's more heavily emphasized in the full proposal. An engagement plan, and this is involving users and developing a strategy to get the information from your project out and more broadly available. I mentioned the DEI component, that's roughly 10%, both of the pre-proposal and the full proposal emphasis. And clearly qualifications, we're looking for high quality investigators such as all of you here on this call. And project costs have to be realistic. We're happy to work with you and scrub and negotiate budgets if you get to that stage. So the timeline is key. The RFP came out Friday. We have an outreach workshop February 2, which I believe is a Wednesday, and that's 10 in the morning. And that's an opportunity, if you're interested, to connect with the Washington Sea Grant staff and help make those connections on developing potentially an outreach plan for your pre-proposal and proposal. The pre-proposals are due February. We'll try to get sometime in late March, and that's going to be squishy depending on when our panel is. The next key deadline is full proposal due in May 20th. And our process is fairly long, and so projects are going to start in about a year from now. And additional information, go to our website listed here. You can email us at wsgres for research@uw.edu. And Kate and I are looking at that. Abby, Deborah will all be paying attention to that as well. Or give Kate or myself a call or an email. We're happy to connect with you. We're happy to discuss project ideas. we're happy to give you feedback, guidance, whatever you would need to try to make our process be a little bit more smooth as you try to go through it. What I'd like to do is open it up for questions. Anything that anyone has about our process, our priorities, engagement plan, whatever. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go back to the regular Zoom format for that. Deborah and Kate are going to help manage those questions as they come in and make sure that I'm paying attention enough to help deal with those questions. And also because Kate, Deborah, and Abby are pretty heavily involved in this, they also could probably add some additional commentary and help address your questions. So let me open it up for questions. It'd be easier if you could use the raise hand function, and we will call on you that way. I know as soon as questions start coming, people are going to just jump. So I'll be patient for a second.
I'll just add folks are welcome to put questions in the chat as well.
Perfect.
Okay, we have a question from Jason Hoden. Is there any advantage or disadvantage in having a proposal which crosses more than one of the 4 subject areas?
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, I would say what we're really looking for is having the proposals tied to our strategic plan, which is broad. Being able to touch more of those would be helpful. There's not really, you don't get extra points, if you will, in the criteria for hitting more than one of those priorities. It's really, do you address the priorities? Kate, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
So the short answer is no real advantage, but just make sure you are aligned with our strategic plan.
The only other thing I would say is that it's generally not that hard to align with multiples potentially.
Another question from Sunny Jardine. Is it possible for a project team to collaborate with more than one Washington Sea Grant staff on an engagement plan, or would that be too taxing on Washington Sea Grant resources?
I would say it's okay to do that. My suggestion to you is engage them as early as you can, so that we don't get 2 days before a pre-proposal a flood of requests for engagement, because at that point it might overtax us. And so for I'll be connected to my team, and they're going to let me know if they're feeling like they're getting overtaxed or stressed here. So reach out to them. They will do their very best to be useful and available to you. But again, earlier is better than later.
Russell, can I just make one more comment about working with Sea Grant staff? So our Sea Grant, our outreach staff are available and able to serve as co-PIs with you on projects, right? I mean, so folks can be fairly involved, and obviously there's a limited number of them, and they have a sort of specific expertise in things. I really encourage folks to come to the outreach workshop. That's an opportunity to sort of get a brief introduction to all of our staff. For those of you who don't know everyone, maybe identify who it is you'd like to work with. And the bonus for you is that the Washington Sea Grant staff time on the project is paid on our dime rather than on your dime. So
speaking of dimes, can you talk a little bit more, Kate, since you, I think you're more versed in this than I am, on the match requirement and what that means?
Yep.
There's a question from David Paez.
Yep. So 50% matching funds. Yes, you need to identify at the full proposal stage. You will need to, well, at the pre-proposal stage, you'll need to sort of have an idea, but you don't have to have really strong justifications. We don't hold you to what you put at the pre-proposal budget, but in the full proposal stage, you do have to identify 50% matching funds. Those typically come from things like faculty salary. Sometimes they come from in-kind contributions from volunteer time or industry or state agency partners or others. If you have, I know matching funds are harder to come by for some of you than others. And so definitely reach out. Happy to have creative thinking, brainstorming around how to come up with matching funds in particular project scenarios.
We have a question from Julie Keister, a practical question. For those of us at UW, please remind us if the proposals budgets need to go through OSP.
Do you want me to take that one, Russell?
Yes, please.
No, they do not need to go through OSP before they come to us. If your proposal is selected for funding by Washington Sea Grant, it will then go through OSP. We will send it through OSP at the end of the process. That being said, it does need to go through your department so that any matching fund commitments or other things like that are all signed off on and squared away. And unfortunately, for folks not at the UW, it's a little bit tricky, but yeah, we do require the folks not at the UW will need to get their OSP letter in the case in which their project is selected for funding as well. So it is a little bit tricky. I would just say folks are welcome to raise their hands and turn their cameras on and ask their question with a real live face if they want.
And while they're thinking about that, you know, if any of you have a research idea and want to talk to Kate or myself about, is this really something that Sea Grant might be able to support? You know, we'd be happy to have those conversations. I had a conversation with a prospective PI yesterday that literally just wanted to make sure that you know, what he was thinking would be something that we would entertain. And so we're happy to have those conversations.
We have a question from Sunny Jardine about engagement plans. Can you describe an engagement plan from a past project that was particularly successful and what led to that success?
I'm going to lean on Kate again. Sorry, Kate.
Totally fine. That's a fun question. You know, I feel like engagement plans take all different sorts of forms. Some have been really cool, fun engagement with like high school classes through the Friday Harbor Labs, and some have been collaborations with animated video people who sort of make cool videos for the public, things like that. But there have also been really successful engagement plans that are really steeped in like working within the community, right? So the some of the tribal projects that we've had that have included, you know, sort of engagement of the community in the research, surveys, presentations back to the community. I can't even tell you the number of cool engagement plan ideas that were, you know, stalled out by COVID, community dinners, those sorts of things. So it really is, it looks different depending on what the project is and sort of who the relevant user groups are, but it's really all about how are you engaging communities, industry, management, you know, whoever the relevant audience is, not only in sort of sharing the results necessarily, but in really defining what's the question and how do we get to the answer.
Everybody's multitasking.
You do always wonder what everyone's doing behind their little black boxes.
Technical question also from Sunny, which is, how do we determine the Sea Grant classification code described on pages 7 and 8 of the RFP?
Yeah, so when you log into eSeaGrant, eSeaGrant will provide you with the link and the list of 120, I believe it's 120 different classification codes from which you get to pick.
Again, we'll walk you through the eSeaGrant magic if you have challenges. And
It tries to make it pretty easy.
You know, one key feature of the eSeaGrant that has come out to bite PIs in the past is it's tied to timing really carefully, and so our deadlines for the RFPs shut down automatically in eSeaGrant, so you got to make sure you pay attention to the timing of your submissions. 501 doesn't cut it if it's due at 5 because eSeaGrant will not let you in. That's the bad side. I'm going to start calling people out here in a second. No, I'm kidding.
I know. I was thinking of, you know, calling out the folks on the phone who've had Sea Grant funding in the past and making them chime in with like, what else are we forgetting that we should be telling everyone? You know who you are.
I guess I'm going to just ask the question. I guess I'm kind of new. This is my first time that I would be applying to Sea Grant, and I should read the strategic plan. But given that you're here, maybe could you say something more about what are the objectives and kind of the type of research that questions that you are interested more strongly, maybe? I'm a salmon disease ecologist, and understanding the evolution of diseases is something that I like doing. But clearly, I need to connect that to the community, and maybe you can talk about how to do that, how to successfully do that. I don't know.
So let me ask you a question, David. So, you know, I mean, clearly salmon diseases are critical to our region. Clearly, they're critical to the larger ecosystem in the Puget Sound. And, you know, so I think in terms of being connected to our strategic plan, that's going to be a fairly easy connection to make. The question I would really have for you is, you know, from going from that research to the application side of that, you know, where do you see those connections with users? Is this something that you would be working and wanting to support a state agency or tribal community? I mean, that's really on the application side. We would really urge you to be thinking about what's the end result, not just within the scientific literature, but the end result in terms of usability and applicability. Does that make sense?
Yeah, certainly. And I think that's like, that's a connection that probably I would need to make more clear if like the scientific reasons the academic reasons, I guess, that I'm for the project are very clear in my head.
Sure.
The practical applications are not as clear because I have less experience with that area. You know, controlling disease is important for industry and for you know, raising fish in hatcheries for conservation purposes. So there's that connection. I guess what I'm having difficulty is how to balance the academic reasons versus the practical reasons in the preliminary proposal.
Yeah, if you look at the criteria that we have, to get a little bit bureaucratic, you know, for the evaluation criteria for the pre-proposal, it's the emphasis, the largest emphasis is on the applicability. You know, is that research question something that is really important for the region? And so making the case in the pre-proposal that it's the work is makes sense programmatically is probably your strongest case. And then as you work on the full proposal, then you can really focus more on the science, the methods, the approaches that way. I would also, you know, we can make connections for you with, we have a couple fisheries specialists that might be able, through some more detailed conversations, be able to help guide you as you think about the use and utility of what you're thinking. So I'm happy to, go ahead, Kate, sorry.
No, I was just going to say the other way to think about it, I think, is, you know, it's not applicable at the pre-proposal stage, but at the full proposal stage, really think about who would you go to provide letters of support for your proposal, right? Who in the universe in Washington is going to be willing to go on the record to say, this is a really critical question and we need the answer to this research. So that's another way to think about that, right? Is just to think about who in the world is fits that for your topic.
This is Julie Keister. Since Kate is pushing those of us who have been funded to talk, I'd rather keep a black box, but I will say something. Yeah, both to David and anybody else who hasn't been funded before, I can just speak from my own perspective that I've had good success with Sea Grant, especially when I had partnerships with agencies like NOAA and DFW, or with tribes, or with these like user groups, I guess I'd say, of the research. And sometimes they've been funded collaborations and sometimes they've been unfunded. They've been perhaps co-PIs, but if they're at NOAA, they can't take salary. So they're providing their expertise and their link to the management applications. And I think that's really powerful. And like Kate said, if the people who would write letters of support are really critical. If you can't think of who might use the research, then it probably isn't very Sea Granty. But it sounds like your research is right up the alley. It's just making those connections that would be important.
Thanks, Julie. Karen has had her hand up, so I want to give her that opportunity.
We're gonna see, can you hear me? Okay. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the research fellowships and how that plays in. I mean, it sounds like we can request those as part of our grant. Is that a standard amount that's requested? Is it vary by institution? New to the whole process. So, thanks.
What institution are you with? I can't tell from the
Western Washington University.
Okay. Let me hand this to Kate, who's got more familiarity with it. I know we know the dollar amounts for UW, but I don't know about other institutions.
Yeah, so the way that it's fairly detailed in the RFP, but the basic answer is you put that the sort of salary and benefits for a graduate student in at the rate applicable to your institution. We've created a cap, and that cap is based on the sort of quote unquote most expensive graduate student in the field in our state, as far as we know. So it's you shouldn't have any trouble fitting under that cap. And you can request up to 8 quarters of salary and benefits for a graduate student. You put that in at the rate applicable for Western. You just put it in a separate budget worksheet so that it has 0 indirect costs on it, which is what that's really the benefit of the fellow construct to you, is that you don't have to pay indirect costs on the salary and benefits for that student.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Aren't Zoom meetings fun? They're just like so awkward sometimes.
I have a follow-up question kind of related, I guess, to the fellowship and also related to the matching funds. So for example, if you requested the 8 quarters of support and included that in your proposal for a fellowship, then would you have to also demonstrate that you have 8 quarters of matching support for the grad student?
No, you don't have to match each item, right? So you can request 8 quarters for a graduate student. That counts toward the 140,000 per year cap, and you have to match the total amount in each year. But you don't have to match graduate student with graduate student.
Okay, so you don't have to match like in your categories, it's just the total amount of your budget.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
And you do have to match, I should look at how we wrote it, but I'm pretty sure you do have to match. We do want you to match at least 50% in the first year, right? So you have to get the 50% threshold in the first year. And if you match more than 50% in the first year, you can match less than 50% in the second year, as long as your total is 50% across the project total.
Okay.
Wow, this yellow thing just came out of the sky and it's in my eyes. It's kind of awesome.
The other thing that I did just want to offer to all of you, just to clarify, is that, so in the RFP, you saw that we're having 2 of these info sessions, one today and one next week. You don't have to come to the one next week unless you just really want to hear it all again, because it's going to be exactly what you heard today. So those are just 2 of the same thing. The outreach workshop on the 2nd, though, we do encourage folks to do, because in addition to hearing the sort of general spiel from Russell, you'll also then have the opportunity to meet each of our outreach staff and Zoom world cooperating, you will hopefully even have the opportunity to sort of interact with them in breakout rooms. You will hopefully be able to select who you'd like to go chat with if we can figure out how to make that work in Zoom world.
Yeah, thanks, Kate. You know, and another thing is, you know, these information sessions aren't the only way for you to deal with any questions or issues you have. So, you know, we are available for you if you think about something in between those sessions. Happy to support you. Just lost Ruth. Does that mean we're ruthless? Oh, sorry. Yeah, you can request funding for multiple fellows as long as there's that space in the budget to do that. Well, I'm going to vote for not prolonging the agony here. Wait, there's another one. Oh, you're welcome, Karen. And again, please feel free to reach out to us. So I'll be respectful of everyone's time, and I do appreciate your engagement and look forward, hopefully, to working with you somewhere along the way in the process. And, you know, again, feel free to reach out to myself, Kate, Abby. Deborah's going to take a little bit of time off, so she's going to be off the hook, I think, for a while. All right. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thanks all.